We are rolling. So the topic today, Damien, is strange phenomenon in the workplace. So some people, like I don't know when we're going to air this, but we're recording in a Halloween. So people are like, oh no, what are we talking about here? Nothing like that. What we are talking about is like, I watch these things happen and I can't believe them. One I've made reference to, but I'm going to dive into it a little bit deeper here. And this phenomenon that takes place is when two people are having a conversation and they're talking about two completely separate things, but they think they're talking about the same thing. And so they're going to try to provide some sort of like outcome to each other, but based on the wrong information. You see this actually in little kid conversations. You'll see two little kids talking about completely separate things, but to each other. But as an adult, we can't do this, especially in a meeting. Now, the fascinating thing to me about it, and this kind of shocked me as years went by as an executive, but I don't care what their title is. They could be an attorney, they could be a CFO, they could be a doctor, they could be anyone. I just had it happen actually in a very, very big meeting, okay? I'm gonna keep it at that just because of some confidentiality related to the meeting, but there were two executives, very successful people, by the way, and one of them was asking questions to the other, and the other kept answering the question in a way that was not even related to the answer. Now, we see this in politics all the time. But it's done intentionally in politics. And there are some nefarious characters who answer things like in a deceptive way on purpose. They're trying to get around it. That was not happening here. Both of these people wanted to communicate with each other effectively in full disclosure, and it still wasn't happening. So there's a responsibility here. We're not just going to talk about the phenomenon, but we're going to actually talk about the outcome. So it ends up being like this. It ends up saying, I'll give you an example. What percentage of your company experiences XYZ? The answer should be 76%, 42%. That question is an objective question with a very simple objective answer. Now, sometimes people like to put color around the answer, and that makes sense. So, for example, they might say, well, 42%, but we've only been tracking it over a period of 6 months, and the number's been getting better progressively over 6 months, so we're inclined to believe that it's higher. Okay, well, that makes sense. But if it's, well, we've only been tracking it for this period of time, blah, 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 and the answer is, okay, so for example, I was in a meeting just recently and there's some expenses that were kind of thrust upon me in my role as CEO that were a little bit shocking. And so I said, well, okay, how much will this cost us? I asked that question. The answer was not a number. The answer was a long story about this and a long story about that. Okay, I'm going to be interested in the backstory, but when I ask the backstory question, that's when I want the backstory answer. When I ask the question, how much, I want a number. If I say, well, what led up to that, then I want that explanation. And by the way, put it in reverse. If I said, how much is it going to cost? And your answer were, well, what happened was we had this phone call with this one guy, and it was Larry, who we were normally talking to, but he was fired. So now all of a sudden we're talking to Janine. I don't care, okay? How much is the number? Now, you can imagine the reverse. What if I said, well, what's the backstory? Who did you talk to? And your answer was $15,000. That wouldn't make sense either. So we have to understand that. Now, what we have to do is if we are confused. Now, I'll tell you that this might seem like I'm shocked, surprised, and bothered by the answerer getting it wrong. I'm actually not. I understand why this happens. There's emotional confusion. I probably do it myself sometimes. So this isn't really about a criticism. It's about a strange phenomenon. It's fascinating to me how it happens. If I am critical of somebody, it's the questioner. I'll take a little drink of water here.
Yeah, it's like, how much is this going to cost? Well, there's an initial outlay of X, and then we're going to have maintenance and support.
Yeah, but that's even an acceptable answer to me. What's unacceptable to me, more so than the person who's answering the question getting the answer wrong, is the person asking the question not sticking with what they asked. Now, if they literally need to know, how much does this cost? And your answer is blue on Tuesday and I like pizza, okay, and I'm good with that, I'm like, oh, okay, blue on Tuesday, and you like pizza. I guess I got my answer. I'm the idiot because that's not the question I asked, and I accepted the answer. I mean, go back to politics. You ask a question about policy, and the person doesn't answer the question about policy. You need to re-ask the question about policy until you get the answer. And if they won't answer it, you have to be able to say, so I'm hearing that you don't have an answer to this policy question, or that whatever your policy is, you don't want people to know. Am I concluding that right? So we have to do things in a language like that. So now we have to not do it with being a jerk. So if you're asking an employee a question and the employee doesn't know the answer, maybe they're embarrassed by that. Maybe they're earnestly working hard to get to the answer. And so, the more emotional intelligence you have to be sensitive to the fact that they might be a little hesitant to provide the answer, that's fine. So what I usually say is, and you've heard me give this example maybe before, I don't know, how many people were at the meeting? Let's say you need to measure this for whatever reason. And their answer is, oh my gosh, it was a great meeting and we had chicken for lunch. Okay. Well, a jerk would say, hey man, I want a number, 27, I don't care about chicken. Well, why did the person say the meeting was great and the chicken was good? Because they were excited about the meeting, which means they're into the mission, they're into everything. And you're going to take and attack this person who's clearly answering in a way that says, hey, I'm into this? No. Then you kill spirit. So instead, that's awesome. I'm glad it's a great meeting, and chicken's probably a good idea. We should have it again. But actually, just from the number perspective, how many were there? And since they fell short the first time, they might a second time. And to prevent them the embarrassment of reiterating the same mistake and saying that the weather was nice and everybody took a bus, you would instead say, so, hey, that's great that the meeting went good and the chicken was good. We probably should do that again. But specifically the number, was it 80? Was it 92? Was it 101? And if they go, now usually what happens is a person's pretty far off on this, still doesn't give you the number. They say a lot. And then you have to say, well, I need the exact quantification of a lot. What was the number of a lot? And you have to do that. And that's a very important thing. And here's why I'm critical of the person asking the question. If you ask the question and you didn't need the answer, you shouldn't ask the question. It's kind of a waste of time. All it is like the difference between curiosity and studiosity. Curiosity killed the cats, studiosity didn't. And studiosity is a waste of time. It's like pornography for the intellect. So it's a better idea for us to actually ask questions we need answers to.
Why do you think people dodge answering questions directly most of the time?
Well, it would totally depend on the setting, because in different settings, there's different motivators. One of the reasons that people dodge the answer to questions is they don't know it. That's one of the reasons that they do it, and they're embarrassed to admit the fact that they don't know it. Another reason that it happens is because they don't want you to know the answer, because the answer is incriminating. It's a bad answer. And they don't think that you are going to be pleased by it or handle it, or you're going to somehow get in the way of a motive that they have in answering the question. And then other times people don't answer questions for ego purposes. They want to seem smarter than everybody else, and they have a passive-aggressive power by holding knowledge that you don't have. And if they divulge that knowledge to you, or their peer or equal to them, at least in the knowledge of that particular item or topic, and so they want to hold something over you, and they want to be powerful. I mean, it's the same reason people will, it's not always why it happens, but it's the same reason that many people drive slow in the fast lane so you can't pass. And it's a funny thing. When somebody drives slow in the fast lane so you can't pass, and you're not tailgating, you're not driving irresponsibly, but you're ready to get past them, and then finally, for whatever reason, they move over and they flip you off when you go past them. It's like, I had to be first, now I'm not, so I'm going to let you know that I don't like being last and you get to be first. I have no power in my life anywhere else once I get off the road, and so I'm going to hang on to it while I'm here.
Yeah, what are the cues? You originally started talking about when people are not on the same wavelength in conversations. A lot of times for me that happens because it's like email and they're not reading the email fully, and they're not listening to your answer, they're not reading the whole reply. Yeah. It's like, how do you pick up on when those things aren't, when two people aren't on the same page?
So I think one of the most important things that I've learned organizationally in business and even in relationships is, what do you want more? Do you want to be right and win the argument and let the other person know that they're deficit and they were short on something and they messed up? Or do you just want the outcome? Magnanimous people just want the outcome. They don't want to spend a whole lot of time just making somebody feel stupid because they didn't get something done. Now, sometimes you have to train a person. You have to build a habit in a person, and they have a habit or a pattern of not checking something in detail. And the only way that they're going to change that is for you to point it out, because it becomes an untenable circumstance to constantly be dealing with a person that's wasting everybody's time from being incompetent. So in which case, you have two things you need to do. You need the actual outcome. So you need to say, okay, well, you didn't read it. So here's what happened. Give me the answer so we can move forward. So there's an actual practical side, but there's an additional side now, which is to train them up on doing the job right, or letting them go, because it's not a compassionate and kind thing to keep a person in a role that they're not capable of doing.
Yeah, a lot of times in conversations, people will say, there was a lot of people that responded to this survey, but it was only 4%, but it was a million people that responded. So it's like, there's varying differences in perspectives of when people are looking at numbers and then, making generalizations using descriptive words rather than hard numbers.
Oh, you see this in the medical world all over the place, where they'll say something like, you have 50% greater odds of contracting this particular disease when you XYZ. So I just recently spoke to my physician about this when it comes to vitamin D in the sun. And he said the way the studies are is you're 50%, and by the way, I'm not quoting for the records of YouTube and everybody else actual data here. I'm giving for instances, I'm not giving medical advice. Okay, but they would say something like you're 50% increased odds of contracting this particular skin cancer when you're in the sun for this period of time. Well, the way that data is generally done is it's like, okay, well, 2 people out of 100 that had that habit got skin cancer. 1 person out of 100 that didn't have that habit got skin cancer. And that's actually 100% greater odds. So it'd be like 3 to 2 would be like 50% greater. And that's so marginally that you feel like when somebody says that 50% of the population that's in the sun is going to walk around with skin cancer. No. 3 out of 100 who do that are going to have skin cancer. And if you wouldn't have done it, 2 out of 100 would have anyway. But here's the kicker on the way that medicine does this. What they don't tell you is that by neglecting a certain amount of time in the sun, you will increase all sorts of other things in your health or unhealth at a radical pace. There are many, many, many diseases that you can die of or be sick or ill from at a percentage level far beyond what the skin cancer one is by not being in the sun. So there's a certain, now I'm not telling people what to do as far as being in the sun or not, but I'm talking to them about how to read data. What if somebody presented to you that, and again, I'm not trying to make an actual medical correlation, but that depression, Alzheimer's, certain other cancers or other diseases, bone issues, are 50% greater if you're not in the sun. And you can list 10 of them. Well, you'd be like, okay, well, I would rather take my odds with the skin cancer thing than my odds with the 10 other things. Now, again, go to your doctor, ask your doctor, but the point would be that people manipulate data all the time or withhold it for those reasons.
So what's the second strange phenomenon that you encounter day in and day out?
Well, you kind of alluded to it, but to hit it a little more directly, it's generalizations that don't match 2 people's perspective. You say to a 5-year-old, how much is a lot of money? $10. You say that to a high school kid, it's going to be $100. I don't know. Each high school kid's different, but you say, I suppose if you said, if you gave a kid a birthday gift of $20 when they're 5 and $20 is a high school kid, the high school kid's not going to be impressed. The 5-year-old probably is. A high school kid might be impressed by $100 or $200, depending on where you live and what you're doing too, by the way, but I'm just using a scale here. The college student, by the way, hopefully the kid is grateful at no matter what level it is, but is it going to move the needle in my life when I have a textbook as a college student that costs $250 by itself, right? And then of course, when you have a mortgage and you have a family, again, gratitude and who gave it, those things are all real. But a lot is a different perspective. You say to a multi-billionaire, a lot of money, it's going to mean, maybe $1 billion, maybe $5 billion, maybe it's going to be $100 million. It's not going to be $20. You say to the average person $1 million and they go, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. So this is an important thing. Why does this matter? In business, when 2 people use terms, they're setting a standard, and this is actually related to one of these other numbers that I have here of the phenomenon. They're setting a standard. A lot of people, we did really good today. If you don't ask what is good to you, 50%, well, that's not good to me. It's 75% on whatever the topic is. You're off by a lot. So you need to establish standards. You need to establish patterns. You need to establish numbers. And if you don't have those, you don't know. So let's get on the same page with what really good means to everybody. Okay? How many babies can an OBGYN drop? 0. Really good is we've dropped 0 babies. Okay? That's really good. You drop 1 in 1,000, it's really, really bad. And you can't have a perspective on there otherwise. So it's just important for us to know.
There's no sliding scale.
There's no sliding scale for an OBGYN.
For baby dropping?
Right.
What's another example in your life, in your world, where setting standards is not a matter of a convenience, it's mandatory?
Well, this is a really good question. I do think that setting arbitrary standards for random things is a very bad idea in business. So a lot of people say things like, we have a standard of excellence, which means being on time always. Okay, you know what? I believe in being on time, like, as a very serious thing. But I also realize that when you're working with a responsible, high-level professional that is on time and they've never made excuses for anything else in their career, and one day they happen to be 10 minutes late to a meeting, you don't ask them why. Because they shouldn't have to even provide, they'll probably provide an explanation, but there are just certain things that sometimes there are outside of our control. There's a difference between an excuse and a reason. High-level professionals don't make excuses, but sometimes they have to provide reasons. And when you're the person who puts out this standard that is like unattainable, you make a really pervasively bad, fearful work environment. And, like, we don't make mistakes here. Oh my goodness. If you look at the most successful people on planet Earth, they're happy to share the number of mistakes that they have made and the number of mistakes that people have made on their teams, as long as they are earnestly doing everything they can to have precautions against them. They're not irresponsible mistakes, but they're mistakes that are just kind of necessary. Like, it's funny when people are interviewing people like Elon Musk, he's quoted all the time, but his circumstances are really great because he's talking about, hey, the odds of Tesla taking off and being successful, I think I heard him one time say it was 10%. This rocket, yeah, it's definitely going to blow up. Oh, it did. Now we tried everything we possibly could to make it not blow up, but we also knew that in order to learn what it is we need to do to have it not blow up next time, we're probably going to have to send one up that's probably going to blow up. And I'm not quoting him, but that's the essence of what's taken place, until they get to this place where they're doing things that no other government has ever done, and landing rockets safely back on Earth that were fired off at one time. So it's a fascinating thing how if you were to set the standard of never failing, he would have to define that. And that would be never failing on the overall outcome, but failing many times to get there. That's why I have to be careful about these standards. Now, where are the standards that we have to be totally straight up on? Things like morality, okay? Can you imagine sitting in a meeting with your boss and your boss says, just, my philosophy, don't lie that often, okay? Big lies should be very rare, maybe a couple times a year. And just always make sure that you clean up your mess when you lie. Oh my God, that's not going to work. You want to hear from your boss, never lie. And by the way, if through a moment of weakness you do, own it and then move forward. Why is that a great standard? Well, first of all, it's, hey, don't do it. Second of all, we're human, so you might make the mistake, and if you do, own it. Well, okay, that's manageable and doable.
How often does setting standards when it comes to like sales managers or leaders that are in charge of sales organizations? I've been in organizations where sales numbers, goals are set like ridiculously high, like everyone knowing you're going to fail. How do you coach a sales manager on something like that?
Well, I think the mistake that the sales manager makes is to set the goals for the other person. That's a total mistake. What the sales manager should do is set the standards of activity for people. Okay? So, and the way that would just break down is say, listen, we have hired you to do a full-time job. And here's what we know. It takes about 45 minutes to prospect the number of clients that you need to call in a day. It takes about an hour to call those people. And when you call them, the efficiencies you'll have, the number of appointments you get, will be this amount. Then that means you're going to do X number of presentations. And the presentations take this period of time. And the closing percentage for the average person in the company is X amount. We're not hiring people to be below average. And so what I do know is if you're working 40 hours a week, you're going to generate a result that looks kind of like this. If you're not generating at least that result, one of two things is happening. You're not working the full amount that you're supposed to work, or you don't know what you're doing, and you are working the amount that you're supposed to. So neither one of those is acceptable. So that's why we're giving you this as a target. But as far as setting your goal, that's going to be up to you. Now, I am going to tell you, if you're going to turn in a goal that's beneath average, it's a little bit like turning in your resignation.
Yeah.
Why do we want that? If you're going to turn in a goal that is average, I would accept that as long as you're consistent, okay? But I would also ask, how can you move beyond that? And it doesn't mean working more hours, but how can you become better at what you're doing? And if you're going to give me a goal that's like twice beyond what the average person performs and you've never performed at a high level, I'm also going to think that that's pretty suspicious too. I'm going to have you tell me why that is. Why should we believe that you're going to be at that level? Now, of course, it's super important just for leaders to always remember they have to have incentives aligned and cultures that support all these things. You can't just like bark out arbitrary things to people and expect them to be all into it if you're not, giving them all sorts of reasons to be a part of it.
Yeah, so what's number 3 on your list of...
Well, it's related. So the last 3 are actually very related. Generalizations that don't match to perspective, but then mismatched standards as well. And again, you're kind of like, almost like you're really good at this, Damien, as a professional. You keep getting ahead of me, and we're answering a lot of these questions even as we're leading into this. So we've covered this a little bit, but it's like mismatched standard when it comes specifically to speed and quality. So we've talked about kind of mismatched standards, really good or really bad. But when it comes to quality and speed, this is where I notice in leadership and in organizational development, people have a big problem. Really fast, really slow, really good, really bad. No. We have to know when something comes off the line, what percentage of it is not right in manufacturing, okay? And likely it should be 0%. And you just go back and you fix everything that is there, Acceptable loss, is it okay here? But that would be things like too with, in business closing percentages for sales. It would be for, customer satisfaction. Somebody's not satisfied with the product. How do you measure the satisfaction that they're going to have if they're not happy with something? Is it speed in response, speed in replacement, speed in service alone? Maybe, but I think, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, it's worth repeating in case any of the audience has heard it, but there have been several different studies done. In fact, I read a case study years ago, so I can't remember the company now, but they were giving themselves an internal audit grade of A on customer service. And the reason they were is because I think it was like a wedding gift product or something that they had. If a product wasn't delivered on time or the wrong way, they always made sure that they then corrected the situation, they got it to them. And they did it 100% of the time, so they gave themselves an A. But when the customers were surveyed, as opposed to the internal audit, they got a C. So the company was like, wow, we're awesome, but the customers were like, nah. And the reason they actually asked for the audit and the survey is because they weren't getting the return business that they thought they would, giving themselves the A. Well, it turned out that the customers were satisfied with the fact that they ended up getting the product, but they were very dissatisfied in the way the conversation took place to get there. So what happened was you'd have a customer, for example, that would call up and say, I have a wedding tomorrow and I don't have the gift and I'm going to feel like an idiot if I show up without it. And the customer service rep would say, well, calm down. Okay, right there, that's it. No, I'm not calm. Now I'm just more angry. Okay. So it doesn't matter if it's reconciled. You don't understand my situation, what? So they trained the customer service people to get alongside the customer, to get angry alongside the customer. So the customer said, the product didn't get here, I'm gonna look like an idiot tomorrow. And the customer service rep would immediately go to that same level and even elevate it. They go, are you kidding me? You didn't get it? I would be like so mad. Okay, give me the name of everybody you talk to. I'm gonna go back there and heads are gonna roll. And they were like, Well, it's okay. People make mistakes. So no problem. When do you think I could get it? Well, we can't get it to you tomorrow, but we can get it to you Monday. Or if you want us to ship it directly to them, we can with a note. That'd be great. And it took care of it. Why? Because I was understood. So those types of things matter, but we need to know what that acceptability or non-acceptability is.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. What is the fourth peculiarity on your list?
Double standards. So people are going to use like this phenomenon thing. The phenomenon about it is weird. So it's one of the funniest things in the world is if you've ever been in a relationship, personal, working, or even more romantic, with a person who says, "I'm just that way." Okay? That's a very strange thing for a person to say. Now, there's all sorts of weird psychology out there in these relationship people who say, people need to accept you just the way you are and blah, 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 blah. Well, yes, I suppose to a degree, but what if you have some really bad habits that you yourself know you should improve? There's a classic saying that God loves you automatically, no matter what. But he loves you so much, he doesn't want you to stay the way you are. That's a pretty awesome thing. And if you think about that, that's the same with parenting. I love you, you're in first grade and you can read okay, but I want you to improve on your reading. I love you, you're in first grade and your manners are okay, but I want you to make them better. I love you, you're in first grade and, you kind of clean your room, but I want you to clean it without being asked. If you think about everything in life, it is based on individual human beings saying, I need to get better. There is no worse person to be in a relationship with who says, I'm just that way. Now, if they're just saying, I'm just that way, and they mean 6 foot, yeah, I'm just that way, and not a very good singer, okay. I'm not talking about those things. We're talking about virtues and things that people can change in their life to become better. Things like sloppiness. You say, well, I'm just that way. You're going to have to pick up after me. No, I'm not going to pick up after you. That's not something I'm going to do. So that's the type of thing where we have to look at these things. And here's why. Here's where the double standard comes in. The person who says, I'm just that way, never would allow at any time ever anyone else in their life to say the same thing. The I'm just that way person is constantly nagging and nitpicking at somebody else to become better and talking about the things they just don't like about them that need to be improved, or they mock them in a certain way. In leadership, where the relationship isn't quite as personal that way, it can also be that way. I demand everybody's on time, but this person's not on time. And why are they saying, I demand everybody's on time? Just so you don't look over theirs. You just, you get confused. You're like almost gaslit. Wait, weren't you just late again? Aren't you demanding everybody's on time? And I think you were just late again. Don't you worry about that. You better never be late. And it's nauseating to people. And these are really strange phenomenon when you see them. And they're almost all either made possible and brought to you by hyperemotion or ego.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Not in the romantic relationships, because we could be here all day talking about that topic, or politics for that matter. Yeah. But when it comes to a leader having double standards, what is broken inside them or what are they blind to that they're not seeing?
Oh, it's self-aggrandizement. It's pride. Ultimately speaking, what it comes down to is low self-esteem, ironically, and low self-agency. So the person does not really feel that good about themselves. So they need to create a false image of who they are. Okay, I know that I'm not responsible. I know that I'm kind of weak. In fact, it might have been Band of Brothers. Did you ever see Band of Brothers on HBO?
I saw some episodes.
Absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
And I can't remember, the Billions guy was in there.
Oh, I like him, yeah.
Yeah, other things that he was in. He was in a couple of things that were really good. Oh, he was also in Homeland.
I never saw that.
Yeah. Anyway, the redheaded guy.
Yeah.
We should know his name.
The main character on Billions.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's Irish, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, but also David whatever from Friends.
Schwimmer.
I'm almost positive that it was in Band of Brothers. I'm picturing him in a role as like a drill sergeant type of a thing. And it was before they were deployed. Maybe it was a different movie, but it was a World War II type of thing. And he's just this hard-ass guy who's like driven and keeps talking about super high standards and all these different types of things. And he's like ridiculous with his men, and there's kind of low morale because of it, but he's acting like a total badass. And then they actually are deployed. And he is inept as a leader. He cannot make a decision. He's abundantly fearful. And that's one of the reasons that he did that. See, what a lot of great leaders do is that they will exhibit strength for trust, but vulnerability for the same reason. Listen, I'm scared too. What I'm asking you to do is really hard. You're going to mess it up like I messed it up, but I'm going to be on you why? To help you, not to hurt you. Because you need to overcome your fears like I've overcome my fears, and I'm going to have to overcome more. And we're going to do this together. Wow, okay, I love this guy. He's raising my standards. He actually believes in me. He's not berating me, which doesn't reduce my standards at all, because they're still there, I can tell. But I can also tell that he's with me having to overcome these things. But he has a certain strength, so he's not going, I'm a weakling too. This is like, man, that's amazing when we do that sort of thing as a leader. But the person who knows they don't have self-agency, they're a coward. They have to act like they've never been afraid of anything before, as opposed to reflecting upon the times that they have just literally been unable to perform, all sorts of tasks and duties because of fear. Or not just fear, other things they have to work through.
Yeah, I mean, that changes the whole energy of the workplace. If you have some arrogant tyrant bossing you around all day versus, a leader that has integrity and treats you like a human being.
Yeah, exactly. It's two totally different things. So anyway, I mean, this is the type of comment, or this is the type of thing that we could talk about over and over again with additional phenomenon. But I think these are the biggest of them. And so I think that if a person really looks at these and they say, I'm going to make sure that I'm not getting those done, they can be a giant. We can go slay dragons.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Dave.